Ba-da-ba-da. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We're really pleased to welcome this evening Trisha Prabhu, who's here with us to host this evening's webinar that coincides, as you know, with Internet Safety Week. As we go through the presentation, if you do have any questions, Mr. Williams is there in the background and he can answer any queries that you might have around how we teach your children e-safety in school. But if you do have any specific questions for Trisha, there will be a short Q&A session at the end. Just to confirm, this session is being recorded and we will be sharing the slides on the MIS system after the event. So I think all that remains to say, without further ado, please let me welcome Trisha. Trisha, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for making the time to come and attend the presentation. And thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Trisha Prabhu, and I'm the founder and CEO of Rethink, a global movement with the mission of tackling cyberbullying and redefining internet culture to be more positive. And I'm really thrilled to be here with you all on Safer Internet Day, very timely. It's a day that's celebrated in 100 countries, dedicated to thinking about internet challenges and how we can tackle them, to talk a little bit about internet safety and your children. So let's go ahead and get into it. So for today's agenda, I'm hoping to kind of cover three big topics. First, want to talk a little bit about cyberbullying, share some statistics with you all, talk a little bit about the types of cyberbullying that we see commonly afflict youth today. Then I'm going to very, very briefly just talk about my journey, what got me into this work, why I'm so passionate about it. And then finally end kind of more substantively talking about how you all can have conversations with your children about devices, about the internet, and help promote more responsible, healthy digital practices. And I'm going to aim to leave about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. I know there are often questions, so want to give you all time to ask those questions. So without further ado, let's talk about cyberbullying. So I think it's helpful to start by kind of grounding ourselves in the definition of cyberbullying. How should we think about cyberbullying? Very simply put, I like to think of cyberbullying, and the resource Stop Bullying, thinks of cyberbullying as bullying that takes place over digital devices like cell phones, computers, or tablets. Now, that may seem a little simplistic. You might think, well, then is it just bullying that happens in the digital world? Why is it that we care about cyberbullying so much? Well, cyberbullying is bullying that takes place in the digital world, but I like to distinguish it from bullying in two key ways. One, cyberbullying, unlike bullying, is often 24/7. It happens all the time for victims that are affected, right? Bullying, when you think about it in in-person context, let's say that your child is being bullied by someone. Normally students can come home, right, and they're in a safe space, a place where they cannot be affected. Cyberbullying, being 24/7, means that youth can be more constantly affected, and the damage can really be exacerbated. The other way that I really like to distinguish cyberbullying from bullying is a lot of cyberbullying today is anonymous. With bullying, traditional in-person bullying, it's really easy to identify who the perpetrator is. With cyberbullying, a lot of youth today, the majority of youth I speak with will tell you, I didn't know. I only knew a couple of the people cyberbullying me, or I'm not sure who was attacking me. And that can be really scary for youth. And it can also deter them from wanting to report that cyberbullying because they don't know who to point the finger to. So some statistics about cyberbullying, just to kind of contextualize the issue a little bit more. So in the UK, according to the Anti-Bullying Alliance, 40% of youth aged 8 to 17 have experienced some form of cyber harassment online, and there are different types. That's pretty jarring, and it's pretty on par with what we see globally. In the US, that number is 46%. So about half, right, a little less than half in the UK are experiencing some form of harassment, whether it is severe or more rare cases is a separate question. But clearly young people are being exposed to this type of vitriolic, toxic content. Something that's interesting that sometimes can seem counterintuitive to folks is women are actually targeted. That is, people that identify as women are targeted. They're 2 times as likely to be targeted online relative to men. And in fact, according to the research, women are not only more likely to be targeted, they're also more likely to be the perpetrators they're more likely to be the cyberbullies. So there seems to be something about the digital medium, and some researchers have speculated, the fact that it's more of an indirect, communication medium that seems to foster, hate and harassment that targets women, and seems to, allow women to say and do things that can be mean or vicious online. But that said, that in no way means that it's just women doing the cyberbullying. Far from it. And as we'll talk about in a couple of slides, women also, face, very specific forms of cyber hate that can be really, really troubling. Another interesting fact is that bullying and cyberbullying often go together. This is especially the case in the UK. The statistics show that, there are very, very, very few youth who are cyberbullied alone. It is often bullying that is paired with cyberbullying that youth are experiencing. So that's really important to keep in mind, because where you see bullying, there may also be a cyberbullying component to that, even if you're not aware of it. So where is this cyberbullying happening? According to the research, Instagram is where most youth report being harassed. And I think that's important to keep in mind, especially because, companies like Meta do release public statistics about bullying, cyberbullying, that type of thing. But, according to its own, internal research that's currently being scrutinized by governments around the world, including here in the UK, youth are actually 100 times more likely to witness or experience bullying or harassing content on Instagram than Instagram's public information says youth should. So youth are experiencing this at a much greater rate than those statistics. So that's just important to keep in mind. Is it's not to say that your child shouldn't necessarily be on Instagram, but just to say that it is a social media platform where a lot of youth are seeing a lot of hateful content or experiencing hateful content much more than the platform claims that they are. In terms of what the research says, is compromised when it comes to cyberbullying, fundamentally it's mental health. Victims, suffer from, a range of mental health effects, many of which, the vast majority of which are not severe, but can include things like anxiety, feelings of worthlessness, in more extreme cases, depression. So, the fact that young people, carry these mental scars with them, that's something that we have to really seriously contend with. And then finally, just a statistic to motivate some of the stuff we're going to talk about in a little bit, what we found consistently in the research is 90% of youth victims do not tell an adult about the cyber abuse that they experience. And so one of the biggest gaps, that I think is most important for, parents to address is thinking about how you can change that number and how you can ensure that young people feel confident and comfortable coming to you to talk about any experiences, negative experiences, any challenges that they might face in the digital world. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that, but I think that statistic is really stark, right? We really hope that young people feel comfortable, but for a number of reasons, they often don't. Maybe they're ashamed, they might be worried, that they might get in trouble, if there was something that motivated the cyberbullying, but there are a lot of things that prevent young people from coming to adults. And, an adult is often the best resource for a young person who's suffering from cyberbullying. So thinking about how we can change that number, that's something we're going to talk about. So what are kind of the key types of online hate that I think are most relevant for folks to know about that, in my conversations with youth around the world, people regularly reference? One is group harassment. So, this is where group chats basically become a very vicious way to target other people. There isn't a lot of stats on this in the UK, but in the US, 42% of teenagers have experienced some form of group harassment, where a group is kind of used to target one person. In really extreme cases, there may even be groups dedicated to cyberbullying or saying something rude or offensive about one person. So this is one key form of harassment to look out for. Coming to harassment of women, this is what I kind of mentioned earlier, we're seeing increasingly now women being targeted with vulgar, sometimes sexual comments on social media platforms, and especially in gaming contexts, women are being harassed. So, these kind of specific forms of harassment targeting women are really concerning. And then image and video-based harassment is increasingly on the rise. If you think about the social media platforms that have become the most popular for youth in the last 5 years, you're thinking about Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. These are image and video-based platforms, and so often we see image and video-based harassment. And with the advent of AI, that has only made this even worse, because now, people can very easily generate images and videos, including fake images and videos, do that very quickly and target people with that content. And unfortunately, certainly what we've seen in the US recently is an explosion of cases of people using AI to sexually harass young women. So, people creating generated content and harassing, their fellow peers, female peers. So this is something to also look out for, is it might not just be harassing text. It could be an offensive meme. It could be an offensive image or video. So what are some of the warning signs to kind of look for, to, keep in mind? Is your child really upset after they're using a phone or a device? That can be a sign that there's something that they're experiencing or seeing that is troubling them. Are they withdrawing from, family and or friends? Are they refusing to participate in activities the way they used to? Is there a sudden, decline in grades? Maybe refusing to go to school, right? Remember, bullying and cyberbullying sometimes go together. Frequently ill, in that respect. And, are they showing these signs? Now, of course, there are a bunch of things that could be contributing to any one of these signs. Yes, there's no guarantee at all that it could be cyberbullying, but this is what, in research, parents say and youth, report as kind of being the warning signs of, them experiencing cyberbullying, especially when it's a bunch of these combined, and maybe not feeling comfortable telling a parent. These are some of the things to look for. So I'm going to talk very briefly about my journey into anti-hate activism. How did I come to be on this call tonight? At 13, growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, so nearly a decade ago, I'm 23 today, I read online this news story of a young woman, this young woman actually, who had sadly had been cyberbullied for over a year and a half and had received, some of the most troubling messages I had ever seen. You are so ugly. I hope you drink bleach and die. Just really, really awful messages. And I remember being shocked and doing more and more research and realizing that in many ways, cyber hate had become a silent pandemic, because it wasn't just this young woman, it was so many other people, like Amanda Todd, the woman in the middle of the slide, Tyler Clementi, the young man at the bottom of the slide. This was an issue affecting youth across the US and increasingly globally. Today, certainly, it's become, an issue it's very, prevalent here in the UK. And so as a young person, I didn't want to be a bystander. I wanted to be an upstander. I wanted to do something. So, my question was, why is it that youth are so willing to be so vicious from behind a screen? What are they thinking? And I wondered, what is going on in their head when they decide to say something offensive? So I started to do all this research into the teenage brain, and my research led me to this interesting finding that in many ways, the teenage brain is like a car with no brakes. Often young people, we struggle to think through the consequences of every decision, the implication of every decision. And so in the heat of the moment, when we're, say, mad at someone or we're feeling bad about ourselves, we can say and do things, that we regret. And so, I thought, well, that's interesting. We're giving young people a device, that already makes interacting with other people, feel very ephemeral and not concrete, paired with the fact that it's really hard for them to think through the consequences of, what they say and how it might affect someone. Could it be that the reason that youth are, so willing to be vicious is because, they're not thinking? And is there some way that I can encourage them to? And so I had this aha moment of, what if I get them to pause, review, and rethink saying something mean? So that is how Rethink was born. So today we have our Rethink technology, which encourages youth to pause, review, and rethink before saying something offensive. And the astonishing finding for me was that 93% of the time, teens aged 13 to 18 that had this chance to pause and rethink changed their mind. So that started what's now been a decade-long journey to build this global movement to get youth to be just a little bit more critical, a little bit more intentional when they communicate with each other online, because the research, which has now been acclaimed by Google and MIT, among other institutions, finds that when youth are just taking that moment to pause and think about what kind of digital citizen they want to be, they show up in ways that are extremely positive and supportive, as opposed to mean and demeaning. So that's me. That's the issue of cyberbullying. So now let's talk about you. Let's talk about how you can have better conversations with your children about the internet and about their digital experience. So I think first it's just important, again, to establish the power of conversation. To come back to that statistic, 90% of cyberbullied youth choose not to tell an adult about their abuse. Starting conversations with your child, it can encourage them to build trust with you with respect to tech, encourage them to turn to you in times of crisis. It can also, crisis aside, just create general transparency around tech and internet use, right? You probably don't want to keep your child on the tightest leash, but you do want to know what's going on, what they're seeing, what types of content they're experiencing. When you talk to them, you create an avenue, you create a channel for that kind of transparency. And it creates opportunities for internet education. You can't tell your child how to be a good digital citizen if you can't talk to them about their devices, right? So having conversation is really, really key. So how do you talk with your child? What does good tech talk look like? First and foremost, I just want to say, I don't think tech talk needs to be awkward or solely reserved for punishment. It's funny, when I talk with youth about tech talk, what they will most frequently say to me is the only time I talk to my parents about devices or the internet is when I'm in trouble. That's the only time I have that conversation. And I think what we really need to do is shift that paradigm, right? So to that end, when you're having conversations with your child about technology, about the internet, about devices, you want those conversations first and foremost to be proactive, right? Begin those conversations ideally before your child gets a phone. And I understand that, for some folks in the audience, that might not be relevant, right? Your child already has a phone, but, even if it's early on, right? Maybe they don't have access to all the social media, or maybe, they're not so active yet. Still, having those conversations early and starting to plant seeds early is really key. What I found has been really powerful in talking with parents all over around the world that I've seen parents consistently say worked really well for them was having just a routine talk. A weekly sync. So, once a week, everyone in the family comes together, sits down, and, just has a conversation about, for instance, how are, these sets of rules that we've all established, going, what is device use looking like? Is there any way that I can support you? And at first that can feel a little awkward and contrived, but pretty soon it actually becomes very routine and it creates a dedicated space for conversation. And if you do have rules or expectations that you're setting with respect to, your child and their device, that's a really good checkpoint, right? A chance to come back to those rules, to talk about them, and, to create space for your child to share their opinions and perspectives on those rules. You want to take a calm and curious approach, not an inquisitive approach. In terms of what to talk about, I think values and expectations about screen time, app use, language online is really, really helpful. It helps set the foundation, again, if you're doing that early on, for how it is that youth interact, right? If they know what's expected of them, then they have, kind of a grounding with which they go into digital spaces, versus a lot of youth today, they're kind of expected to figure out technology and, then maybe tell their parents about it. If you can kind of tell them, this is what I expect from you, then they go in with those expectations. I think emphasizing, that a phone, this type of digital communication, it's a privilege, and it's, with every privilege comes responsibility, can be powerful. Trust. Remind your child that you trust them. That's actually really powerful. Right? It makes them want to live up to that trust, right? So remind your child that you trust them. To the extent that you feel comfortable, I really, really encourage you to get into the scary stuff. Parents sometimes want to shy away from some of the scariest sides of the internet, but when you have conversations with your child about some of those worst case scenarios, what you're doing is two things. One, you're signaling to them, you can always come to me to talk about these challenges. And two, you're actually establishing expert and expertise, right, on those topics. A lot of kids think, my parents don't know anything about this stuff. My parents don't know about these challenges. How am I supposed to talk to my parents about this stuff? They don't know what's going on. If you establish expertise and say, hey, I know what's happening. I know these challenges. I know how they affect youth. Maybe you don't want to have this conversation, but if X, Y, or Z were ever to happen to you, this is how we need to handle it. This is why we want to try and avoid these situations. What you're doing is kind of establishing yourself as an authority figure, right, in this space. For a child, that's really powerful. Again, they're much more likely to listen to you, to respect what you're saying, and to come to you, right? If something does go wrong. To the extent possible, also try and, create space for your child's voice. Ask them how they're feeling, what types of expectations they want, what their perspective is on these topics. What happens if your child comes to you and says, I need help, I'm facing a challenge online, what do you do? As difficult as it might be, my first piece of advice is to try to stay calm. Do not minimize the situation. It's not that big of a deal, man up. Sometimes we have a culture of bullying or cyberbullying as a rite of passage for youth. I would avoid, that path. Don't blame your child, right? This is why I told you not to spend all of your time on social media. What have you been doing? I've been telling you to do your homework. And do not unilaterally take over the situation, right? I think sometimes, you panic, your child is in trouble, you just want to take over the situation, handle it. To the extent possible, they came to you, they put their trust in you, respect that and work with them to come to a resolution, right? So if they come to you and say, I'm being cyberbullied, the solution should not be, oh my goodness, obviously you want to take action, do it with them. Right? Strategize about next steps. And then of course, it's on you to take those next steps, but let your child know when and how you're going to do it. And by doing that, you're signaling to them, reminding them that coming to you was the right choice, that they trust you as much as you trust them. And it encourages them to come to you the next time, right? If and when they need help. Last thing that, I'd really encourage you to talk to your child about too is how they can help a friend. Sometimes it's not your child that's experiencing a digital challenge. It might be their friend experiencing a digital challenge. Maybe it's their friends that are the ones that are doing the cyberbullying, and your child comes to you about that. In that case, I always tell, parents to encourage youth to be an upstander, speak up. Don't try and confront, try to educate. Instead of saying you are doing the wrong thing, use I sentences. Say, I'm uncomfortable with the way that you're behaving online. Emphasize that if they're ever afraid, the best thing they can do is turn to an adult. They may worry, oh, my friend will be mad if I report this cyberbullying that they're experiencing. They don't want their parents to know. Their friend will thank them later, right? That's what you need to emphasize to them. This idea of killing them with kindness, right? This idea of being kind to the people who are doing the bullying. A lot of research shows that cyberbullies are former victims who are struggling with their own internal demons, their own challenges. So where you can be kind to them, often, cyberbullies are surprised and moved by being treated with, a level of respect. It makes them feel ashamed that they're not, treating other people with that same level of respect, and it can actually change behavior. And encourage your children to check in with their friends, chat about their feelings, normalize asking that question of how are you really? Because youth can often be a really powerful source of information, and encouraging youth to be there and support each other is really important. So I know that, of course, as always, I went 4 minutes over, but that is in a nutshell, my advice to you all about cyberbullying, digital challenges, and how you can work with your youth to establish healthier digital practices. I hope that was helpful and insightful. With the time we have left, I'd love to take any and all questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tricia. Very insightful. There's a lot of really useful information there for us all to unpick. I certainly know for myself and my own children that having those open conversations and that dialogue is such an important thing, particularly with my son, who will tend to be a little bit more insular than my daughter. I also quite liked your analogy around the teenagers. They are like a car with no brakes, and we actually talk quite a bit within the school community of saying, before you send a message or before you send that email, just imagine if you were to stand up in front of the whole school and say it, because that's in essence what you're going to be doing, because it will get out there eventually. And that stopping and rethinking is a really, really powerful tool to helping children to make good decisions. You've obviously been very good, because we have had absolutely no questions whatsoever, which is flabbergasting. And obviously we are always open to questioning and always open to sending questions on to you, if that's okay. receive any. But I think in light of the fact we have no more questions, I would like to say a really huge thank you to you for your time. It's a joy to listen to you and the inspirational journey that you've been on, and I really hope that you're able to turn around people's lives. Having said that, we have just had one in here now, so I'm just going to read the question out to you and then send you back if that's okay. So what are some ideas to get these open conversations going with our younger children, say our 7 to 8 year olds, even before they have personal devices? And how do you go about incorporating this good thinking early?
Yes, such a great question. So I think a couple of things come to mind here. So if your child doesn't have a phone yet, but you're wanting to maybe start some of those conversations, it's helpful to kind of open the conversation by asking them maybe what they know, right? That's always a kind of a helpful way to get in there. So, just kind of asking them, about, maybe they'll bring up a phone, maybe their friend has a phone, just use that as a gateway, right? So, what have you heard? What are you seeing? And, engage with them, talk with them about their experiences, and use that as kind of a platform with which to kind of start, chatting about, hey, that's interesting that you saw that, here's something that, maybe I want to share about that, right? And it's kind of a good way to, so I think starting, by understanding what their knowledge base is maybe the best way to go into those conversations, right? Because 7 to 8 year olds, it's funny, in the US, when I do talks, I go to schools, and sometimes when I ask 7 to 8 year olds, how many of you know about, Instagram or are on Instagram, it's like 70% of hands in the air. Their parents don't think that they are. And sometimes it's a lot less, right? And so that can really shape, the child's knowledge base and where it is that you can come in and be a positive influence. So I think starting there is key. And then in terms of, what to emphasize early, I think emphasizing expectations really early is good, because then young people have that voice in the back of their head, right, when they have those first digital experiences. And then I think emphasizing just really simple things that young people can do to protect themselves online. So, for instance, maybe you want to, set up certain types of settings, and encourage young people to get on board with those settings. It's easier when you are talking about the why behind those settings. Why, for instance, it's good to have, a private social media account that someone has to request to follow, as opposed to a public social media account. I think if you can just start to introduce those ideas early rather than impose them later, it's then everyone's on board, right? Everyone, it's not something that you're saying you have to do this. It's something they understand why, right? And so everyone's coming together. It just makes for better compliance. It makes for a better digital experience, right? So to recap, I'd say start by understanding what their evidence base is. And then, in terms of, what to emphasize and talk about, I think if there are certain rules or things that you would like for them to have later when they do get those devices, maybe have those conversations about why early, so that when it comes time, there's not a lot of conflict, there are no surprises, and everyone is on board.
I couldn't agree more. I think having those conversations from an early age really does help, and the difference that we see between those that have those conversations and are very open about technology, and those that are less open to those conversations, it is clear the differences that we see. There's another question here. So thank you very much for your informative session. My question is, if you are the victim of cyberbullying, can one not turn off the channel given it's not face-to-face?
Yes, that is a phenomenal question. So that's definitely something that, in certain cases, we encourage youth to do, if they are being cyberbullied, to, deactivate the channel. With that said, in really persistent cases, we've seen instances of youth deactivating a social media account, creating a new one, and then having cyber hate come that way. And in other cases, where youth have deactivated a social media account, sometimes they're targeted via email, they're targeted via text, and the question is, how far are you going to go, right? You can't tell the the young person, oh well, get rid of your phone, right? I mean, for a lot of young people, especially when they get older, that's a pretty essential thing to have. So I think in that case, if it, if it's at that level of extremity where just deactivating the channel is not enough. I mean, there are a lot of different options. One, depending on, the context, it could be something, and, Mr. Williams could probably speak to this, that you might raise with your educational institution. But another thing you can do is, depending on the character of the cyberbullying, normally there is, you can actually reach out to law enforcement. So if you're an adult, it's harder to do that, but as minors, youth have protections online, so you can reach out to law enforcement and they can help you tackle that type of challenge if that ever does occur. So all that to say, it's definitely a good strategy, particularly if that shuts down the cyberbullying. Definitely do that. But if it continues, it's persistent, and if you're looking for some kind of accountability, you might want to explore some other channels.
Thank you, and I think that links into this next question around generative AI. Obviously, this is a growing concern amongst our whole community. Yes. What are the legal procedural avenues open for parents if they discover this is some sort of bullying is happening via generative AI, in terms of taking the content down and preventing further spread? Obviously, we have in this country CEOP, which is the Child Exploitation Online Police Force, and a lot of sites have options to block content. But from your experience, what are you able to add into that conversation?
Yes, it's a great question, and unfortunately, it's one that's becoming more and more relevant. I mean, I'm sure folks may have recently seen, instances of celebrities, right, even being targeted with, generated content that was sexualized or vulgar in some way. In terms of, legal recourses, so it's interesting because it really does vary from country to country. You have much more protections here in the UK, for instance, than in the US, so that's good. Like was referenced, I think reaching out to law enforcement, particularly if a minor is involved, is the best thing to do where it is any type of child sexual exploitation content. You can absolutely, get that content removed. Platforms are usually very responsive when it comes to that type of content. And when you work with law enforcement, you can do that more quickly. So my advice is, if it is a specific case of CSAM or child sexual abuse material or any type of material like that, even if it is AI generated, I would say work with law enforcement as you reach out to platforms to try and get that content taken down. Platforms are receiving a ton of requests. They do have technology to try and proactively monitor for that type of content that can be generally effective, but AI makes it more difficult. Sometimes it can seem like it's an adult in the picture instead of a child, right? It complicates the process tremendously. So where you can involve law enforcement to escalate that request, it becomes a lot easier. It's going to be, in terms of the real big legal questions down the road, I mean, the bigger open philosophical questions is, can a cyberbully say, well, I didn't generate it, the AI generated it, I'm not liable, right? So we start to get into thorny questions that the law has not in any jurisdiction, currently dealt with. We'll have to see, where that goes. Clearly, there's a lot that's left open here.
I think this is going to be there's a lot of issues that need ironing out over the coming years, and we'll continue to do so with all of this as technology moves faster than any procedural protections that often go in place, which just comes back to that thing of just having that open dialogue as much as possible. Yes. This is probably quite a common question, and thank you for asking this one, but what happens if you have a child who has not earned your trust and who might go behind your back when it comes to sort of the screen time and respecting the boundaries? Have you got any top tips? I guess you're not a parent, but have you got any top tips in terms of technology for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, if your child is bending the rules, so to speak, I think there are a number of things you can do. I think I think it's good to one, have a conversation and say, these are the expectations. We can revise the expectations when I see that you're meeting the expectations, but you're not right now. And that's a good way to incentivize compliance with behavior, right? Is to say, you want more autonomy. I'll give you that autonomy when you've earned my trust, but your behavior right now is not giving me a reason to give you more autonomy, right? Make it clear that in many ways they're in the driver's seat much more than they realize, that they can prove to you, right? That you might give them more of that freedom, but they're not displaying the right behavior. In terms of tools, so there are a ton of free tools. I mean, Apple actually, and iPhones are very common. Apple actually has a ton of parental control software and settings that you can activate that are simply on the phone. So you can go in and set screen time limits that are enforced through your account. So that is something that you can do. And most of the social media apps now in the last couple of years, Instagram most recently, have released parental control settings that are, again, through linked accounts. So you can set up an Instagram account. Your child will send you a request to become their parent, and then you can monitor the content that they're seeing. You can monitor how much time they're spending on the app, so you can create some of those guardrails. So I would say look for those app specific, especially if it's specific apps that they're spending way too much time on, or you want a really close picture into that's going on. There are a lot of app specific parental control tools now, and then if you're looking for kind of a more broader phone level kind of parental control system, Apple offers a lot of really great resources now. And again, I think to the extent that you can emphasize to your child, I'm doing this because you're not you're not giving me a reason not to. That's a really good way to encourage them. I've seen young people kind of get closer to where their parents want to be because they realize that that's a good way to get their parents off their back. A lot of young people don't realize that's a good way to get your parents to trust you, right? So that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're getting quite a few questions that are similarly around the theme of what protections you can put in place. And you're absolutely right. All the social media platforms are getting much better. I think it's fair to say they haven't been that good over the years, but they are getting better. But I would also add in your internet service providers. They do have a legal duty to offer sort of filtering software for you in the home, and all of them have got if you're with BT or with EE or whoever you're with, there are options there available on their websites to do that. And I've got a couple more questions. That's okay with you? Is it okay to monitor your child's online behavior? Well, I think it's fair to say that absolutely it is. But do you have any top tips for doing that?
Yes, it's a great question, and I understand the kind of the sentiment behind this question, which is on the one hand, no one wants to be the parent that that's sneaking onto your child's phone and reading. There's a sense of well, I want my child to have autonomy, but on the other hand, no parent wants to be the parent that isn't in the know, right, and doesn't understand what's going on. So my basic answer is yes, it's definitely okay to monitor, especially when your child is using a lot of social media apps where they can connect with not just friends but a lot of strangers, right? So I think yes, it's definitely okay to monitor. I think one of the best ways to go about that is to be open about it. Be open about it and normalize the fact that you're monitoring. Make it clear, right? When you kind of go behind your child's back, it seems like you're doing something wrong. I always tell parents, just say that you're monitoring them, right? And make it clear why. You're monitoring them for their own safety. You're monitoring them so that you can establish healthy digital practices. And again, tell your kids if they are making good on their promises and behaving in ways that are consistent, maybe slowly, right? You tighten the leash, you loosen the leash, right? In preparation to for them to become young adults and go off and have their own lives and hopefully retain those healthy digital practices. But I think doing it very openly is the best way to do it. That's where I've seen parents have a lot of success, because then there are no questions, right? And there's also no opportunity for your child to turn around and go, you're doing this and you're sneaking behind my back. And no, I am monitoring your device, and it's a totally healthy thing for me to do. I'm trying to help us co-create a good digital environment for you, the same way that I try and ensure that you're eating healthy food, and I try it, right? So I think that's to the extent that you can frame it that way, you take away any power for your child to turn around and go, hey, what are you doing?
Oh, indeedy. And we've got one last question, and it's always so good to end on a positive note, because this person who's written this question is absolutely right, and it's something we talk about in school a lot. Is the internet is an amazing place, and what we can do in the internet connectivity and the relationships that we can make and the knowledge that we can share is fantastic. But the question is, devices and being connected to friends can be a great source of joy for youth. How do you enter a first conversation about the benefits rather than going straight to the issues?
It's such a great question, and I think it is important to emphasize for youth, because sometimes maybe what when youth lose, or rather, they don't see parents as credible or legitimate sources of information, as when parents lean too heavily into the internet and technology. It's all terrible. That's never going to be a resonant message, right? When kids are also leveraging technology to have educational experiences, right? To talk with friends, maybe even to talk with family, right? So clearly there are all these benefits. I think There are a couple things I'd emphasize. I'd emphasize, talking about, certainly connection, right? Connecting with friends and being able to share experiences and memories that are special. I think this idea of creativity and expression is definitely something to lean into, right? So we have a lot of young people today who are using the internet and social media to raise awareness about issues that they're passionate about, right? To put out maybe artwork or things that they're creating, right? And, create a following around that. And it's actually a place for young people to be creative, right, and to show off their passions and the things that they're amazing at. There's a young woman in the U.S. who I recently met with who is using social media to shine a light on moments in history that we've forgotten about that are really transformational and powerful. And she is bringing so much joy and also insight into people's lives each and every day, right? So I think this idea of the internet as a vehicle for really passionate creative expression, I think that's a good entry point. Connection, that's a good entry point. Learning, that's a good entry point, right? Of course, the internet has so many services that enable us to learn and think. So I think emphasizing, those types of applications, it also kind of helps direct, your child to, okay, when I get on social media, I'm going to connect with friends because that's what social media is for. It's not about necessarily connecting with, someone I don't know, right? And maybe, when I get on social media, I'm going to be able to share authentically about who I am because that's what it's about. So I think introducing those benefits are really important because then it shapes how young people think about their use, right, of the internet and what they should expect from it. And, if they're taught to expect from it, a chance to be creative, a chance to communicate, that's what they're going to use it for, as opposed to trying to figure that out themselves and maybe going down paths that we don't want them to.
Thank you so much, Trisha, and that concept about creativity and what we can produce because of the internet, and without it you wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have been teaching 2 years ago during COVID, nearly 4 years ago now. It's just amazing what we can produce, and it's so good to end on an absolute positive because that is why we are here. So I would like to thank you again very much for your time. Thank you very much for you and for everyone attending today, for listening to your powerful message. As I said before, if there are any questions, please do direct them to myself or Mr. King, and we will gladly send them as on or answer them if they are school specific. But Trisha, thank you very much for your time and have a lovely evening, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.